You booked it, episode 193. What's going on, everyone? Thank you for joining me today on You Booked It, the #1 podcast where you learn how to create a successful entertainment career. I am excited to announce your new entertainment industry platform, the You Booked It community, is now free for everyone. Inside, you'll be able to chat and connect with Broadway performers, Emmy nominees, top choreographers, past podcast guests, and people just like you navigating this wild and crazy entertainment industry. Build industry relationships, learn how to create a successful entertainment career, and join in on live masterclasses with the industry's top leading professionals from Broadway and beyond. Tap the link in the show notes and I'll send you your invite link. And now, let's meet today's guest. Okay, let's get this started. I am excited to introduce my guest today, Scott Edwards. Are you ready for this, Scott?
Oh, I am so excited, Dane, to be here. Thank you.
You bet. Let's do it. Scott has been on the fringe of show business for over 40 plus years, producing nightclub shows, concerts, television, and hundreds of special events. He has worked with and helped develop talents like Paula Poundstone, Dana Carvey, Yakov Smirnoff, and hundreds of other comedians, the famous and not so famous. As a business entrepreneur, Scott has opened over a dozen companies in his lifetime, from a small construction company and chain of comedy clubs/restaurants to owning a submarine and beach shack. As a producer of comedy events, he has created live shows, TV series, concerts, and the man behind the laughter. Scott, that is a quick intro of who you are and what you've done, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, fill in the gaps, and a little bit more about what you do as a professional in the entertainment industry?
Well, thanks for asking, Dane. It's been really a crazy ride. As your intro, by the way, great job on that. Alluded, I started off as a young entrepreneur. My first company was a small construction company. I was 17. Right after that, when I was 19, and this will age me, I was doing spinning records for a portable DJ service. We were doing disco before the movie Saturday Night Fever came out. And then when I was 24, I opened up my first comedy club. It grew to a chain of 3 comedy clubs, 2 restaurants, and a couple of art galleries. And then even during those years, I always had an itch to do new things. And that's when I got involved in a submarine that we ran out of Monterey, California. And I actually owned a beach shack for over 5 years on the big island of Hawaii. So it's been a very diverse career. But to your question, when I got into comedy, I was raised with a great sense of humor and appreciation for the art form through my father. And I was literally selling life insurance when I was 23 years old and hated it. And I went on a quick vacation with a then girlfriend, soon to be wife, soon to be ex-wife, down to Los Angeles. And I dropped into this satellite room of the Comedy Store right near the university, UCLA. And I had my first experience with stand-up comedy. I happened to see Sandra Bernhardt and Dave Coulier that night. And as I drove home, I said, man, Sacramento needs this. I want to do this. And I quit my job. I went bankrupt, which was crazy because I wrote off like $2,800, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I wheeled and dealed and got myself in August of 1980, opened up my first comedy room, and the opening act for that show was Gary Shandling. It was his first gig outside of his hometown of Phoenix, Arizona. He made about $200 for the week and was the opening act. And the headliner was already a big star in your old hometown of Vegas, George Wallace.
Really?
Yeah, he introduced me, and Gary Shandling introduced me to Bob Saget and Jerry Seinfeld and these people, and we got to work together. And I really didn't know what I was doing, but I'm not afraid to ask. And a lot of these comics, I would ask them, what should the pay scale be? What are audiences looking for? What are the comics looking for? And the comics helped create my business. And I think that's why I had a very popular club for comics to play because we really respected the entertainers and treated them right.
Oh, that's so good. And I like how you said, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had to ask. And that's so important. And I think sometimes we get in our heads about whether or not we know all the things. We always want to allude to the fact that we know more than we do because we don't want to seem silly, maybe. But ultimately, we all have to learn things at some point. So ask the question. And what I always find about asking questions is that people are much more receptive and open to helping you out than you might initially perceive.
I think that's so true, Dane. A lot of people are afraid to ask the questions, and I'm an A personality. And I learned actually from that very first company when I started a little construction company. I was actually a night maintenance guy for a small motel, not a very glorious job. I was cleaning toilets and fixing TVs, mopping floors. And I was in the bar and I overheard these two guys. And again, I was about 17, 16, 17, talking about they had this hobby where they were painting the lines in parking lots on weekends and picking up a couple $100. And I took that idea and flew with it. And I went to visit other professional striping companies. And I just walk up and ask the owners, say, hey, this is something I'd like to do. How'd you get started? What do you think? What do you charge? And they loved talking about themselves, and they shared all the secrets that saved me years of failing and making mistakes. And I was able to start and get the business up and going right away. It was really exciting at the time.
Yeah, so good. Let's move on and dig into the first section here. And Scott, look, I am a sucker for a good quote. What is your favorite quote you'd like to share with everyone?
I will. It's a Walt Disney quote. I'm a big Disney fan, and he and I had the same thinking. We're both entrepreneurs, and that, like Emmett Stone used to say, failures are the stepping stones to success. But my favorite quote is, the way to get started is to quit talking about it and begin doing it.
Oh, so true. Love that. That getting ready to get ready that people just get stuck in.
Yeah, a lot of people, and I've been a salesman and a customer service person my whole life, and I think the reason people like me go that route is, and again, it falls back on that A personality. We're willing to jump in and kind of risk exposing ourselves by bringing up subjects and talking to people and asking questions, and most importantly, listening to answers where other people are intimidated or too timid to do that.
Yeah, 100%. And ultimately, I think when it comes to just doing it, there's always so many questions and so many factors that you just aren't going to know the answer to. And you're going to fall on your face and you're going to fail. And if you just accept that those are the realities of moving forward, even if you think that you're completely prepared and ready to go, you're going to move forward and then realize you don't know much at all. So if that's the reality, why not just jump in head first and start figuring it out?
It's true. I used to say, when I fall, I'm falling forward. You may land on my face, but at least I was moving forward.
100%. Let's get into this next section here. And Scott, of course, you are an entertainment professional. I am an entertainer, and think that you'd agree that this industry can be one of the most subjective, brutally honest, and personally emotional industries in existence. And you know, as well as I, that in order to create and have a successful career in this industry like you're having now, takes a lot of dedication and hard work. And while, yeah, there is an outrageous amount of fun and excitement being an entertainer, doing what we do, there are also our fair share of obstacles, challenges, and failures we are going to experience, and we're going to have to move forward through. So tell us, what is one key challenge, obstacle, or failure you've experienced in your career, and how did you come out the other side better because of it?
Well, I kind of have two answers for you, Dane. First, personally, I think one of the things that holds people back, and really was my biggest challenge from that early construction company, but definitely through my comedy club years, is I never had money. I don't come from money, probably a lower middle class family here in California. I'm not good with money, which is probably not good to say to the public, but I went into everything basically on the seat of my pants. For example, when I opened my first comedy club, I didn't have any money. So I negotiated with a restaurant to use their banquet room to do my shows. And so they'd have a banquet during the day. I would come in and be the labor and tear down their banquet, set up my comedy club. Then I would host and produce a comedy show for an audience of 100 or so people. And then after the show, I'd have to break down my comedy club so they could do a banquet the next day. It was a lot of work, a lot of sweat, and we didn't make any money at all for the first 6 months, but it didn't cost me a dime.
Right.
And then the other is you're talking about show business and how much work it is. And I think one of the big fallacies, especially back in the 80s and 90s, really before your time, Dane, but in the era that I was working with Leno and Carvey and Seinfeld, stand-up comedy was really hot. I caught the wave just right. It was a lot on TV, Evening at the Improv. The Comedy Store was famous. There was, when I opened my club, Dane, it was the 12th club in the country. And that was 1980. By 1985, wow, it was like Starbucks. There was a club on every corner.
Right.
Every disco turned, from the 70s turned into a comedy club in the 80s. And a lot of restaurants like the Steak and Ale and others would turn their restaurants into little comedy clubs. They were all over the place. Comics, especially the amateur comics, would see somebody like Seinfeld or Leno or Carvey or Saget, all these people I worked with, get huge contracts or TV shows and thought, oh my gosh, I could be a TV star and it's only going to take me a few months as a stand-up comic. And that is so wrong. As when you alluded to, there's a lot of work in this industry. And the term overnight success means somebody sweat and created and put their life into their art form for maybe 3 to 5 years before they were an overnight sensation.
Right. Yeah. It's always so much more behind what we see on the outside. By the time you ever hear about people, by the time you see the wave that someone might be riding, man, there is so much work that goes in before you ever get to that point. I've watched a handful of documentaries and things on various comics over the time. And was it about Robin Williams maybe? And he would be in the middle of a tour, in the middle of an outrageously successful show, but would just never not stop writing jokes everywhere, always analyzing it, always creating new stuff. And I think there's another thing that I read somewhere about Seinfeld saying, right, I get maybe 2 minutes for free, maybe 4, because I'm who I am, right? I've got a bit of a celebrity. But after that, I got to be just as good as anyone else. So they really have to be real, true professionals at their craft, always.
Yeah, to those 2 points, I got a chance to work with Robin twice. He was on my stage twice, and he was just a genius and had one of those quick minds that was always working and writing, and he loved the craft. So whether he was doing a big 2,000-seat concert in some town, he would get off stage and run over to the closest comedy club that had maybe 20, 50 people in the audience and do another hour. He enjoyed it that much. And then Seinfeld and Gary Shandling were 2 in particular, but I've seen it many times, that were such professionals. My comedy club was in Sacramento. It was not a hallmark of entertainment. Everybody that was going to get famous was going to be in LA, San Francisco, Boston, New York. But my club was an integral part of the system going to university or college. After your open mic stage and you're performing professionally and getting paid, and then hopefully you'll get seen and get a chance at stardom. What I'm leading up to is they were always working and writing to stay fresh. And there was several times that professional entertainers, like I mentioned, would go on stage literally with a piece of paper. And after they got the audience on their side, say, hey, everybody, I want to try some new material. And they would literally read off something they may have written that morning at breakfast or the night before, test it out, and then go back and finish with their headlining closing bits.
That's so cool. Yeah. And get the direct feedback right there. Why not, hey?
Oh, they're so popular and so busy. They're not going to go do an open mic to try material. So they'd have to do it in front of a paying audience, but they respected the audience. And I think the audience enjoyed being in on it. Yeah. Hey, here's a little behind the scenes. I wrote this yesterday. Let me know if it's any good.
Yeah, totally. I think that's very cool. Very cool. Well, let's move on to a time that I like to call your spotlight moment. That one moment in time you realized, yes, I am going to be in this entertainment industry for a living, or maybe it was, yes, this is what I need to be doing in this industry. Tell us about that.
And it goes a little bit back to where I was sitting in the audience of a comedy store in Los Angeles, where I said, man, this is just something that's so exciting. And I should explain, Dane, I don't feel like I have any talent. I was more of a producer. I hired people like you that had talent. However, once I opened the club and started emceeing the shows, it became a running gag with the entertainers because I, as the MC, would end up doing more time than the opening act. I don't know if that was good or bad, but I had so much fun on stage, and I was more of a I didn't write material. I never wrote material per se. I would interact with the audience and just loved it. And I think that was one of the reasons I fought and continued to operate my clubs and end up expanding it to quite a big business. But in those early days, my aha moment was getting on stage in front of, might have only been 20 or 30 people, but not only being able to control the audience and capture the audience and include them in the evening, but to make them laugh. And so, much like a professional entertainer, what's the payoff? Yeah, it's always nice to get paid, but we do it for the feeling we get when we hear the audience roar.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, being on stage, there's nothing really quite like it, I think. And for obviously a lot of the listeners of this podcast really can wrap their heads around that one. But I also really enjoy that you are on the production side of things because it's very unique as well for as far as guests on this podcast. I have a majority of the talent, the performers that are on the stage doing the thing, but the production side of this industry is just as important as what it ultimately ends up on stage. Can you talk a little bit about being a producer and I guess more the intricacies of what it takes to create productions?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Dane, because I do feel that the real success of a show comes from the entertainer. It's the entertainer's connection with the audience. It's the material, it's the timing, all the stuff that we learn to expect from a professional, whether it's a singer, dancer, or comedian. But I think it is true that on the production side, that any gem has to be presented in the right light. And that's where having the correct stage setting, the correct lighting, the correct sound. For example, you might have a situation where you got a really talented comic, Dana Carvey, and if the audio and the sound doesn't work and people can't hear him, what's the point?
Right.
Or funny story, of course, it happens in life. We had a couple shows where there were blackouts. And so you've got an entertainer on stage. All of a sudden, his audio is gone. His lights are gone. My club was in a basement, so it was pitch dark. And we had it happen a couple times. But what was a great moment for entertainment was the comics, being professionals, knew how to enunciate and make sure they were heard and project throughout the room. But we were prepared, and we would actually pass out flashlights to 4 or 5 members of the audience, making them a part of the event. And they would shine it on the entertainer, and the show went on. And those moments will always be memorable because as important as light, sound, and talent are, there's a way to make it work if everybody's on the job and being a professional. And I was telling the story because we were prepared for those blackouts and we're able to get through those unique moments and really bring them out as a win.
Yeah, being prepared is everything. I do a handful of corporate production work, working as a producer and stage manager as well. And that's a whole nother crazy world, but very cool and pretty much crosses over all the skill sets from the live theater world. But I view that work as like being a pilot or something, where generally speaking, if you've done your work and you've set everything up, it should be pretty much smooth sailing. But We all know live anything never goes 100% to plan. And it's that you've already pre-thought of all the different contingencies of what could happen and that you're ready to make the changes and step into manual mode if need be, right?
Yeah, it really, I think the job of the producer is to think through all those possible situations. I have a quick story, Dane, if we have a second.
Yeah,
And
for
this is
sure.
away from show business, but it gives you an example of what I'm talking about. Sadly, here in Sacramento, we lost a couple of sheriff officers to a helicopter crash a number of years ago. And my wife is in law enforcement, and they knew that we had a background in event planning. And so when they had the meeting to put together the funeral for these officers, which was a very somber and serious moment, there was very important people in the room, and they were making very important decisions. And because of the amount of people they were expecting for this funeral, it was going to overflow the church. And so they were going to put big televisions and audio systems out on the grass for extra people. And they're going through and they're making all these decisions. And I was just there to represent and be supportive. And I stopped them and I said, okay, everything you're saying is going to work. However, if you're going to put all these electronics and all this out on the grass, you might want to turn off the automatic sprinkler system before the event. And it was kind of like, oh, wow, crap, we
Oh,
didn't think of that. But it was a contingency that as I'm running through in my mind how the event was going to go, a possible situation, and how you can head that off by planning ahead.
yeah, 100%. So simple, such a big solution as well. Great. Well, let's piggyback on that spotlight moment and let's talk about your number one booked it moment. Walk us through that day, what was going on in your life, and what about that moment makes it your favorite booked it moment?
I think my favorite booked it moment, and I have to be honest, Dane, there's been probably hundreds of situations where I had an opportunity to work with some celebrity that I really respected. There was a couple from my dad's era, Soupy Sales, actually threw a pie in my face. Pat Paulson, the perennial presidential candidate, we became close friends, and we actually had him run for mayor here in Sacramento. It was hilarious. But one of my booked it moments was I come from the generation, my buddies and I are huge Monty Python fans.
Yes.
And the situation arose unexpectedly. And I was able, and he wasn't a stand-up comic, of course, but I was actually able to bring into my club the very funny British comedy actor, Graham Chapman, who was a member of the Monty Python comedy troupe. And everybody knows their movies and the Faulty Tower TV shows, just an immense talent. And I was able to bring him in, and it wasn't a comedy set. He really just shared stories with the audience. And for me, it was such a great opportunity. That booking and that meaningful meeting of the minds and sharing of our lives has carried with me. And what made it even more poignant, and sadly, it wasn't 6 weeks later, he passed away. And the fact that we were able to make him feel special, he really enjoyed sharing his stories with the audience and being treated like a star on a small comedy stage, which is way different for a movie TV star. And Graham Chapman was just one of those people that you never think you're going to be able to interact and share time with. And I got to, and that would be my booked it moment.
Oh, so good. Love that. And let's take a moment to talk about the present. What projects are you working on now? What are you looking forward to? And it's a weird time, right? We're still amongst this global pandemic. How do you see the entertainment industry moving forward in the next couple of years?
Yes, it's been challenging for everybody from entertainers like yourself to producers like myself. I did sell my comedy clubs back about 20 years ago and semi-retired, but I've kept my toes in the water and have produced several fundraisers for charities in the years since. But we had to cancel 4 large charity fundraisers last year. We're hoping to bring them back later this year, but I continue to book comedy shows, but now they're more to raise money for charities instead of putting money in my own pocket. To keep myself entertained and involved in the industry, I started my podcast, Standup Comedy, your host and MC, where I get a chance to interview old friends, professional entertainers from over the last 4 decades. And I also present, because of my TV shows, concerts, and live stage shows, I recorded a lot of that. So I'm able to share evergreen live comedy sets from the famous and not so famous from over my many years in the business. And just sharing that comedy material and interviewing funny people during this time of no entertainment has not only been helpful to me mentally,
Yeah.
a little source of energy and positivity in a dark time, but I was able to share that with thousands of listeners. And I think that has been great. Coming up in the future, I did write a book for those that are interested in being in the comedy business. It's called Be a Stand-Up Comic or Just Look Like One. And that and future comedy course to try to go with my book that to help entertainers that are just starting out. And whether they're comedians or just presenters, we can teach people how the difference between being an amateur and a professional.
Oh, so good. What incredible resources for anyone out there listening that wants to delve into this comedy world. Go check out the podcast, check out the book. So good. And it is time now to move on to one of my favorite sections in the interview. I call it the Grease Lightning Round. I am going to ask you a handful of questions. I want you to answer them as quickly and concisely as possible, one after another. Are you ready?
All right, let me get loosened up. All right, I'm ready, Dane. Let's go for it.
All right, let's do this. First question. What was the one thing holding you back from committing to a career in the entertainment industry?
I have to be a little blunt here. I have not felt like anything held me back. I was able to set and achieve all the goals I set, and that includes entertainment and in business. And I felt like a blessed man.
Beautiful. Second question. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
I believe that the audience or your customers come first. If you want a successful interaction with your audience, make sure that they're coming part of the event and included in the entertainment.
Yes. Third question. What is something that is working for you right now? Or if you'd like to go pre-COVID, what was working for you before this industry went on pause?
I think as a professional master of ceremonies, I emceed thousands of live stage shows, really prepped me to be the host of these current podcast shows. And I did start my podcast pre-COVID, but obviously during this last difficult year, it's enhanced its importance of sharing some entertainment. And I feel that history of being an MC has continued and led me to the future.
Absolutely. And the fourth question, what is your best resource? Whether that is a book, a movie, a YouTube video, maybe a podcast or piece of technology you found is helping your career right now.
Well, thanks for asking. I think that what's important in all sorts of business and entertainment is communication. And my personal tool is the Larry Wilson method. Larry Wilson is a comic magician, was Magician of the Year back in the 80s and 90s. But in the recent years, he's taken his communication skills and put it into a training course. Pre-COVID, he was doing it all personally. He has adapted it to an online course. But the Larry Wilson method has kept me fresh and sharp as a communicator.
I have not heard about that. Can you give a little synopsis teaser of what's involved?
The Larry Wilson method is basically a professional entertainer. Larry Wilson, he was a comic magician who for decades has been doing live stage shows, but even more recently, his claim to fame is he's one of the top ranked corporate entertainers. And he has been teaching for years that in the corporate world, whether it's interacting with your customers or with the staff, how important communication, inter-office communication is there for the success of production, a business, or whatever you're involved in. And he has taken his skills and his brains and put it into a capsulated training program. It's really amazing. The Larry Wilson method, I would look into it.
Yeah, very cool. I will 100% need to check that out. And the fifth question, if you had to start your career from scratch, but you still had all the knowledge and experience you've collected from your career in this industry, what would you do or not do? Would you do anything differently, or would you keep it the same?
Again, I may have a bad answer for you, Dane. I don't think I would change a thing. I've been very blessed. I caught the comedy wave at just the right time and was able to work with some of the best in the business. And probably the only thing I would change is that in 2001, an offer came along and I sold my comedy clubs, and I may have not done that if I got a chance to do a retake. But I love the business. I love the people in the business, and wouldn't change that at all.
So good. And the last question, what is the golden nugget knowledge drop you've learned from your successful career in this industry you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Well, your listeners are entertainers, and I thought hard about this, and I wanted to bring something to them that is important industry-wise, and it doesn't matter what art form you are in entertainment, a dancer, a singer, an actor, or a comedian. The number one bit of advice from a producer is respect the clock. In other words, your job on stage is allotted so much time, and you don't want to disrespect that by going long or going short or missing your time. From a production side point, the timing of everything can be crucial to the success of a show.
Yes, respect the clock. Very well said. And to wrap up this interview, Scott, it is time to give yourself a plug. Where can we find you? How do our listeners connect with you? Is there anything you want to promote?
Well, I've already slipped it in, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you, Dane, and I'd love your audience to check out my podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, it's called Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC.
Yes.
And I got to tell you, the crowd goes crazy when they get a chance to hear all that great stand-up comedy, and I know you will too.
Beautiful. Love it. And for everyone listening out there, I have put the links to Scott's book, to the podcast, everywhere you can find him into the description of this episode so you can easily connect with him. And also be sure to share this podcast with your fellow entertainers, coaches, teachers, arts and entertainment educators, and anyone you know aspiring to create a career in this industry. You Booked It is the number one resource of expertise on how to actually create a successful entertainment career. Case in point, everything Scott just gave us today, from the producer production side, the comedy lifestyle side of this industry, so good. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Scott, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad we got connected. What a pleasure to talk.
Thanks so much. And I wanted on behalf of your audience, thank you, Dane, for what you're doing, having this connection in show business with everybody and sharing this knowledge is valuable. And we appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode and want more like it, be sure to smash that subscribe button. Also, be sure to jump inside the brand new You Booked It community. Head over to youbookeditpodcast.com/community or tap the link in the show notes right now and take your career to the next level. Inside, you'll connect with your people and develop real industry relationships, which, by the way, this podcast has discovered is the number one fundamental that creates long-term career success. Discover opportunities and join in on over 20 upcoming live masterclasses. Tap the link in the description of this episode, and I'll see you there.